Hi, my name's Molly, and I thought I would come and say a few words about my story as to why I am here today. My name is Molly. I'm 27 years old, and I have a condition called Usher syndrome, which is the most common cause of congenital deaf blindness. Now, I say it in a really blasé way because it's basically my life, but I'm gonna say to you now, it's not always been like that. It's taken a lot of hard work and support to get to where I am today. So if we just rewind a little bit and start from day one, shall we say? So I was born deaf, so I was given my first pair of hearing aids at 18 months old, and so that was all I knew really, and I had a perfectly happy childhood. I was always the only kid with hearing aids, but that was just the way it was. It didn't particularly bother me or hinder my confidence as a child. The only thing that was slightly different was I wasn't able to speak properly till about 6 years old. So I was held behind a little bit at school. I was held back a year, and so I was always a year ahead of my peers. But again, being an August baby didn't really bother me too much. So I have been wearing hearing aids since 18 months old. Couldn't imagine life without them. Everything was going hunky dory until I got to going to senior school, which, like any other kid, is quite nerve wracking. New school, new faces, etc. But for me, I was struggling with I was unable to lip read, which for a deaf child or person is pretty isolating because I was relying on lip patterns and anything visual, really. So as soon as I started to struggle to read lips, I was struggling big time. I was also struggling with headaches and I was clumsier. And it was actually my teacher of the deaf at the time who said, Molly, you might need reading glasses, go for a routine eye check. Because it's not unusual for deaf people to be so exhausted because we're using our eyes all the time to, understand and digest everything. So you can imagine how exhausting that is. So nothing seemed particularly unusual at this point. But it wasn't until I got to the opticians just for a routine eye check that the optician asked my parents, do you know why Molly is deaf? And they said, well, actually, we were told it was a technical blip. We don't have any family history in it. It is what it is. And the optician, and this is really, really lucky to be honest, the optician had been reading up on Usher syndrome and had said to my parents, I think there's something not quite right at the back of Molly's eyes, and I think it might be linked to her deafness. So appointment after appointment, ended up at Moorfield Eye Hospital. I'm 12 years old at this point, and that's when they confirmed I in fact had Usher syndrome. Now, Usher syndrome at this point to me just seemed like a condition, just something else to add to my list of problems, shall we say. But I never really understood the severity of it. I was only 12, and looking back in hindsight, pretty naive. But the thing with Usher syndrome is that it consists of deafness from birth, and then the blindness of it, which is retinitis pigmentosa, is a progressive blindness. So you start off sighted and then you gradually lose your peripheral vision. The rate of progression and how much you lose depends on the person. They had said to my parents when I was 12 that I shouldn't see too much of a difference till I was in my late 20s, early 30s. However, I went from being partially sighted at the age of 12 to severely sight impaired, which is politically correct for blind at the age of 14. So I lost the majority of my vision in 2 years. So it's fair to say none of us were expecting that. We weren't prepared for it. School was a real challenge. They didn't really know what to do with me. I had support for the deaf side and support for the blind side, but neither of them knew about the other. And I've often said it's one thing being a deaf person, it's another being a blind person, but being a deaf blind person is a whole new ball game. So it was a real challenge because I was struggling to accept and understand what I needed as well, and it was all during critical years of education. It actually resulted in me leaving mainstream school and going to a boarding school for the deaf, which in hindsight was the worst thing I could have ever done. Um, the school, they talked about supporting me and having experience with children with Usher syndrome, but they couldn't have been further from the truth. Unfortunately, it was all about this money, and so of course they wanted me there. But once I got there, I suffered bullying from both teachers and students. I was labelled a fraud because I seem and look okay. I can't really be blind because I'm as independent as I am. And I was often quite confused myself because I had the Senko say to me when I was telling her I'd been matched with my guide dog, Eunice, which involved a lot of training, mobility training, and you have to qualify to become a guide dog owner. They don't just hand them out. But I was really struggling accepting having Eunice, and I loved her as a dog, absolutely adored her, but accepting that I needed her was a real challenge, and I was only 16. And I remember saying to the Senko, I'm really struggling. I haven't been eating, so I haven't been going to the dinner hall because it meant leaving my room with Eunice because it was dark at this point, can't see a thing in the dark. And she said to me, well, Molly, you don't really need her, so that's why. And I remember kind of believing her, and I made the call twice to guide dogs to actually hand Eunice back because I was kind of convinced I didn't need her and that my life would be easier without her, which absolutely breaks my heart now because I adored Eunice and I really wish I could have had the correct support to support me from day one with her, because that would have helped a great deal more rather than being denial for a few years longer. So anyway, needless to say, having Usher syndrome was a challenge, particularly because I was in those delicate school years and I didn't have the support. But that said, at home I had an amazing support system. I lost the majority of my sight in 2 years, as I mentioned. I struggled a lot with my mental health, mainly because of the school that I was at, I would say. But as a lot of people will know, these things don't just go away. Even now at 27, I do struggle with my mental health. But fast forward a fair few years, I did get into university, decided it wasn't for me, the support again wasn't there. I just kind of felt that these places weren't ready for me yet, and it was nothing on me, it was actually them, and that I was going to succeed anyway. So I have been self-employed now for about 4 years, going on 5 years, and I consult in accessibility and digital accessibility, but also it varies massively, the work that I do with large and small tech companies, consulting on how technology can be hugely impactful, but also the use of inclusive design helping not just groups of people like myself, but every single one of us. And yeah, so I use my own personal experiences as expertise, but I also have training in sort of design and other bits. I know bits of code. I'm not fab at code. I just know bits, so I know enough to help with back end developers and designers when it comes to consulting and giving out solutions, or just merely just guiding them in the right direction where accessibility and inclusion is concerned. So yeah, I'm 27. I'm moving out. I'm on my second guide dog, Bella, who is beautiful, amazing, and needless to say, she comes everywhere with me, which is a slightly different story with Eunice. But I think having Eunice really taught me a lot of things. Definitely having my family and friends have made all the difference. I learned the hard way about friends, and that not everyone you think is going to be there is going to be there. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having just a few friends. Quality over quantity any day. And that is me, really. But I am very passionate about raising awareness of Usher syndrome. We set up the charity, the Molly Trust, and that was mainly to raise awareness of Usher, but what we can do and not what we can't do. We're not about the sympathy vote, but what we can do with the right tools and support in place. So as a charity, we do fundraise for assisted tech, we mentor, we get people together so people with Russia who have never met someone else with Russia can meet, and their families. So we're only small, but that's something that's definitely helped us as a family cope, dealing with Usher syndrome as a family as well as me as an individual. So the Molly Watt Trust, it will always be very close to my heart for that reason. And then Molly Watt Talks, which is my company, which has really moulded me into the person I am today. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out. I have a website, or I'm very, very, very present on social media, Twitter, which is Molly Watt Talks. Don't hesitate. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions, or if you want any help in your workplace, etc., don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.